Welcome to the Worth Listening podcast, where we focus on having positive and productive conversations around money. I'm your host, Lauren, a 4-time Olympian and certified financial planner. On this show, my guests share their money stories. Everyone has a unique story and experiences both wins and losses when it comes to money. My intent is to give listeners something they can relate to, something that builds their courage to be open and take control of their own money story. When I'm not creating a great show for my listeners, I'm running my company, Worth Winning, where I help individuals and families organize their finances. Check us out at worth-winning.com. All right, now on with the show. Hey, everybody. So today we're having a really important conversation, one that's especially timely with everything happening in the economy and the current administration. I'm joined by my cousin, Jessica Gray. She's an attorney specializing in employment and labor law, and she also happens to work for the federal government. I think many of you know that there have been some big changes as of the beginning of the year, and a lot of people are without jobs. Typically, we think of a government job as something that is going to provide stability and great benefits and a secure future. But that's just not the case right now, and maybe it's not necessarily the case anymore. Jessica's here to share what it's really like working in the federal government right now and how sudden policy changes are impacting employees, and why no one, whether you're in government or not, can afford to ignore what is going on. I have learned so much from being a fly on the wall in her personal situation and from other government employees I know, and I think that, while you may feel like it doesn't affect you, we definitely have to tune in because what is happening in the United States is happening to all of us. So we're going to also dive into Jessica's personal money story because that's what we always do when we have a guest on, and how growing up shaped her views on finances, what generational wealth means to her, and how she's preparing herself and her family for uncertain times. This series is all about the uncertain times that we're all facing, and I think that Jessica's experience will help you better navigate things that you can do during uncertain times. So if you've been feeling a bit uneasy about job security or wondering how political shifts could impact your paycheck, or you just want to hear some real talk about staying financially ready, this episode is for you. Let's get into it. Welcome, everybody. I am so excited to have my favorite cousin. Literally, I definitely have a favorite cousin, y'all. Like, it's probably not good to say your favorite when it relates to family members, but I do. Jessica Craig, welcome.
Thank you.
I got to tell y'all, she threw me a baby shower when I came to DC, a surprise baby shower on top of that. Like, that was just amazing. Like, to get to see all of my family in one place. It was just lovely. I love the way her side of the family shows up for each other. And I'm hoping that my baby girl is going to have a family like that. So, well, at least has her part of the family to set as an example. So,
absolutely.
All right. So we know today we're talking all things crazy government jobs. But first, we got to introduce you to the people. So why don't we just start at the very beginning? Tell us a little bit about where you're from, how you grew up, do you have siblings? Like, who is Jessica Gray?
That's a good question. Who is Jessica Gray? I am a Washingtonian from Washington, D.C., born and raised. I am a twin. In addition to my twin sister, I have 3 older sisters. Both of my parents are also live in D.C. My dad's from Savannah, but my mom is from Detroit. They met here in D.C. and they were never married, so we did not live in the same household. And they also, ironically enough, I think had very different perceptions about money, but I'll get to that later. I am an attorney by trade. I specialize in employment and labor law. I currently work for the federal government. I went to undergrad in New York. I moved to Atlanta, did Teach for America for 2 years, and then I moved back to DC to go to law school. And I think that captures it.
That does. I feel like I know you better. I've learned some things that I didn't know. Also, I have to throw in for you guys that her mother and my mother seem like they're identical twins. And they didn't know each other for a very long time. I think they were like 50 something before they actually even met.
Yep. They met in 2009
Unbelievable. Yeah, for the inauguration.
for the inauguration, Obama's inauguration. Yep. Although I think they had maybe, of course, talked on the phone before then, leading up to the inauguration. But the day that they first met each other, they both were bald and blonde with those cat eye glasses, the signature big frame cat eye glasses. That's a very interesting story.
It is.
Yeah, they should write a book.
Like, I'm like, the genetics are strong,
Although I don't know if they would survive each other while writing a book.
but it would definitely be a bestseller for sure.
It would, yes, it's a very interesting story. And I'm actually just so grateful to be a part of it because the way that the family dynamic and just growing up. So I guess the elephant in the room is not really an elephant, but my mom was adopted. Sometime in 2006, actually, it was New Year's Eve 2006. I knew the names of my mom's birth parents and I Googled them. And I was sitting in the car with my twin sister and I said, I'm just going to Google them. And I could not find her birth mom listed, but I found her dad. I called him and he knew exactly who my mom was. He knew exactly who I was referring to. And we had a conversation. And then he gave me my mom's birth mom's phone number and I called her as well. And so from that, my mom met Lauryn's mom on her dad's side, and that's how that relationship started. And then that's how I met Lauryn. And I think I met Lauryn before our parents met, before our moms met. I think we met in 2007, and then they got together in that January of 2009.
You got a good memory.
Now, don't ask me what I did yesterday, but I can remember certain things for sure.
And y'all just got a little 2-minute clip of the story. Like I told you, it could be a whole book.
It could be a whole book. Yes.
All right, so let's go back to we know who your mom is now. What did she do for a living? Did you grow up in her household? Did you grow up in your dad's household? Was it a little bit mixed time? Yeah, what was the kind of environment like?
So, my mom is a retired federal government worker, and we grew up predominantly in her home. She's a homeowner. She's owned a home in DC since I was 5. So, I want to say 1987, the summer of 1987. And we did, as we got older, started splitting time between my mom and my dad. She retired in 2014. In the federal government at the time, they had a retirement system called civil service retirement, which meant you would receive 80% of your salary and you essentially did not have to contribute to it.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, the contribution was so low, and that's why it was very favorable. So there's a distinct difference between people who started working in the federal government at a certain time frame. I want to say anyone who joined the federal government after 1987 could no longer be considered civil service. And then they created the new federal retirement system, which requires you to contribute, but then also there are discretionary contributions that the federal government matches, which is called, they called it a thrift savings plan. I mean, it's a 401k essentially, but the thrift savings plan allows you to make additional contributions to your retirement and then the federal government matches. But prior to that, as long as you worked, I can't remember an exact number of years. It may be 30 years, it may be 25 consecutive years, you can retire under this it's called civil service retirement. You get 80% of your retirement. Now, because of the way the contributions work, you could not draw from Social Security. So because you were getting such a large annuity payment from your federal government retirement, you do not get Social Security. But it is essentially one of the most, I think, generous retirement packages because you didn't have to contribute. Or whatever the contribution was, it was so small. I can tell you, even under the federal retirement system, initially the contribution was like 0.5% of your salary. It was that low. And only through acts of Congress have those amounts increased over time. So right now, my mandatory contribution is 4.4%. And that is still in addition to what the federal government contributes on your behalf.
I told y'all you were gonna get educated about this federal government today. So I think a lot of millennials like have some basic understanding of the idea that like back in the day, a lot of people depended on pensions, and currently they pretty much nobody depends on pensions. There's a very few jobs, and if you can find a job that has some sort of pension related income for retirement, that it's like an exciting thing, but also you got to put in your time. And we're also given the rap of like never wanting to put in the time to be able to earn the pension. So that has put us in a position to where we have to save for ourselves. And so I think Jessica provided great context of like just how good a pension was. 80% of your income with almost no contribution. Whereas now, like I've seen a lot of times for my clients in various programs, depending on what company they work at that do have a pension, it can be up to 11%. That is a mandatory amount, which is forcing people to save, which is good because the biggest problem that we are having as well is that people are not willing to save. But it's hard to say because of this economy. But I digress. Let's stick to the program. Your mom was a government worker. You grew up in her household. What kind of lessons were you learning about money as it relates to, what kind of like money environment did you experience?
The money environment was definitely, check to check. Unfortunately, I think I grew up at a time where I think my mom, she was not looking for additional growth opportunities at work. So she relied on whatever incremental increase she would have gotten from her job, and that was it. So she didn't look for other opportunities. She didn't look for growth opportunities. She didn't pursue a degree that would have allowed her to have, more money. Essentially, it was just her in the same job with the same salary for however long she worked there. And she may have been promoted based on whatever incremental promotion she would have been entitled to either way. But ultimately, she didn't do anything to sort of proactively earn additional money.
You feel like that is a result of like, I mean, there's usually like multiple things. So it's like her upbringing, her personal personality, but also like the times. I think it was a time frame where women in the workforce were being, well, the inequalities were different is probably a better way to say it. And so it's kind of like a lot of people had the attitude of just go with status quo, be grateful to have a job versus, being ambitious and trying to move up to the next level.
Yeah, I think it was a combination of things. I think the first was that she was comfortable. She also had 4 children. My sisters were older at this point, and my twin sister and I were, I think, probably maybe 2 or 3 when she first started. But as we got older, I think she just was content with what she was doing, and it didn't really hold any interest for her to do anything else. I also think that, and this still rings true, especially for the Washington, D.C. area, the federal government was an extremely competitive and stable employer. And so, again, just in addition to the retirement benefits, the medical benefits are great. The flexibility, maybe not as much flexibility at the time when she was working, but modern day, the flexibility, great. And just think in context prior to this administration. So I think more than anything, she was content with what she was doing for the money that she was making, and certainly for the experience that she had. And leaving probably didn't even cross her mind because she already knew she was working for the most competitive employer in the Washington, D.C. area. And it still afforded her to buy a home. It still afforded her to travel occasionally. She didn't have a car. She didn't buy a car till she retired. So she kept her expenses relatively low by not having a car, not having a car note, gas, car insurance. But I will say she also was that mentality, and I don't want to say, maybe mentality is not the right word, but there was an era of people who relied heavily on playing the lottery. So she played the lottery every single day. When we talk about discretionary income and having a savings, we did not talk about saving money. We did not talk about budgeting. We did not talk about credit cards. We didn't talk about how things got paid for. We didn't talk about checking accounts, savings accounts.
Was there an allowance?
No, we did not have an allowance. We did not have any sort of regular money coming in for doing any chores or
Coupons? Was she into coupon clipping or anything like that?
not that I remember. No, it was very much, I mean, from everything I remember, and this is going to sound harsh maybe, but it was just like that. It was her money. And she is still even extremely private about money, which I think is, I don't want to say problematic, but the people don't learn, children don't learn. And I also think that it creates this sort of like artificial taboo about money. If we're not talking about money and expenses, then we're not talking about whether or not you have healthy money habits, whether or not I'm inheriting those healthy money habits or negative money habits. Everything I feel like I learned about money and learned about saving, it became intuitive. My dad, on the other hand, I had my first summer job when I turned 14. And one of the things my dad did was say, look, I want you to develop really good habits around saving. And we'll go to the bank. I'm going to open you a savings account and I want you to deposit every check that you've earned for the summer into that account. And I'll give you the money so that you save your money. But whatever your check was, and maybe the check was like $200, I'll give you $200 instead. Because he wanted me to have money saved up when I went to college. And that was my first sort of conversation about you need to have money saved. You need to be thinking about your future and saving money. However, he also did not talk to me about, day to day spending in the context of how you spend when you're earning money. How much should you be saving? How much should you be spending? How much, we were not talking about that in that level of detail. But he always talked to me about saving money. And even still to this day, talked to me about saving money. My mother was, to this day, I don't know how much her pension is. I don't know how much money she has saved. I think that her biggest nest egg is her house. And I told her this before, that she should consider selling it and using the proceeds to offset her expenses with her retirement. The downside, I think, of her retiring at such a young age, and I say young because she was not even 60 yet, but she was eligible to retire and it was going to be the max contribution. She was already maxed on the contribution she was going to receive. As time has gone on and the cost of living has increased, they get a small increase, whatever Social Security says is a cost of living increase. So they can maybe 2%, 3% on their pension. But her property taxes have gone up. Of course, utilities have gone up. So when she retired in 2014, which is over 10 years ago, that annuity payment probably looked very good. But now that she doesn't have any additional income, she hasn't gotten a second job. She hasn't, she's not even a part-time job. She talks a lot about money is tight, but I don't know what that means. It's not really, I bring home, my check is this much, my expenses are this much, and this is how much I have left. So we don't talk about it in that level of detail.
Yeah, I feel like this is what a lot of people are experiencing. And I teach a 6 week financial literacy course where the first thing we walk through is kind of like money mindset and how your upbringing and what you saw as a child, what kind of messages you heard have affected you. Because I don't think that a lot of us as young professionals do a lot of reflecting on it, but it sounds like you have done the reflecting. But then, like, the next piece of the puzzle is okay, I've reflected on it. We're kind of the new sandwich generation, if you will. They refer to Gen X as the sandwich generation, where they're taking care of their parents and they're also taking care of their kids. Millennials are now, I think, 28 to 42 this year. So we are the ones that are getting ready to have to take care of our parents or already are taking care of our parents, in addition to, having children that could be high school age, sometimes even college age, depending on when we got started. And it's a really tough thing to have to like try to have these conversations with the parent who doesn't want to have these discussions. But also, if it gets real tight, like, are you gonna let your mom sleep on the street? Like, it's like, probably not. But I'd like to be able to prepare for the adjustments I might have to make. But I need you to tell me what's going on so I can prepare. And it's kind of just this rigmarole of how do you unwind what has been, like, just deep seated long term poor money habits or poor money conversations, poor money communication, even though you're trying to, change the future. And I feel like a lot of people throw around the word generational wealth and they want that for their children. But, it's like you're trying to pass it to the next generation, but you still have to figure out what's going on in the generation before you because it does affect you. And it's just like a hard place to like to be and to be trying to like adult in.
Yep. One of the reasons why I think it's important, at least my mom give us like some basic level understanding of her finances, is because she's getting older and we need to know what her financial standing is if something happens. I don't know if she has life insurance. I suspect that she does, but I don't know. I don't know if she has, money saved that she would, there's enough money to have a funeral. We don't know. I mean, she has a will, but it doesn't outline, where the resources are, if at all, other than her home. And I also think that there's this idea that if people know how much money I have or how much money I save, that they're going to ask me for something. And I think that that's part of why she's not transparent. It's this idea that if people think I have money, they're going to start begging or going to start asking for small amounts here, small amounts there, and then it turns into bigger amounts. And so I don't know. But what I do know is, and from what I remember from my childhood and where she is today, not much has changed about her relationship with money. She was check to check then. I think is sort of the same now, especially in the very beginning, going from, getting a paycheck every 2 weeks to a once a month pension. Towards the middle of the month, she will run out of money. I do know that. She also has just like habits, like she smokes cigarettes. Cigarettes are expensive. Like I said, she plays the lottery. She likes beer and wine. She goes to the casino every now and then. And I'm not saying that those things are, I mean, smoking is bad, drinking is bad. But the other things, I mean, people want to have a social life. I understand that. But if it's to the detriment of your resources, your money, and if, midway through the month or towards the end of the month, you're scraping for change at the bottom of your purse, then maybe it is a negative relationship with money. She also has like, and this is something that I think has impacted me again, that living paycheck to paycheck, it always felt like money was tight in a way that I don't want to say we were poor, but it always felt like you could not ask for extra. So we got clothes for school twice a year, probably at the beginning of the year and around Christmas. And maybe you got something in the spring, but it was not like if we needed shoes, you had to wait for a certain time of the year to get new shoes. The same idea around even just grocery shopping. You got all of the necessities first, and maybe every now and again she would get us our favorite snack or a favorite fruit. We loved cantaloupe growing up, but we didn't always get cantaloupe. We used to love like oatmeal cream pies from what I remember, and we didn't always get oatmeal cream pies. So there was always this sense of money was very tight. The impact of that, I think, on me is I don't transfer that to my children, that money is tight. I talk to them about waste and being wasteful. So if I buy you something, I want to make sure you like it because I don't want to waste my money on whether it's food, whether it's clothes, whatever that is. I try to have a more balanced approach of transparency with money with them because I don't want them to feel like they can't ask for something, especially if they need it. But I also think that they are conscious. It forces them to be conscious about, do I need this or do I want this? And I started noticing recently that conversation about waste and money has been having a positive effect on my daughter. So we went to a store this weekend. It's like a Korean market. So they sell all of these like knickknacks, and they sell beauty stuff, and they sell tchotchkes, like nothing that's you really need, but when a kid goes in there, they light up because it's all the pretty packaging, and it's designed for kids. And she could go in there and just walk around for 15, 20 minutes, and she's satiated by just that window shopping. She doesn't feel like she has to buy something. And it's made a difference because, it used to be we couldn't go in a store and she was like, I just want. And now we're at a point where I didn't see anything I needed or wanted. And it's something that I'm noticing she's now understanding. My son is a little older, so I think he's already gotten that and gotten to that point of only asking for things that he needs, or if it's a want, it's, it has to be grounded in something, not just I want it and I want to get it today. We'll go out to eat, and if I say the meal comes with this drink, if you want a milkshake, you have to buy it on your own. And that also forces them to be like, well, if I have to buy it myself, I'm not getting it. So I'm having more, my approach to money with my kids has been very different than my mom. Even just going back to money always felt tight, like we didn't eat out a lot, not at sit down restaurants or at like fast food restaurants. We didn't travel much. We didn't. So it always felt like we were on the cusp of poverty. And for me, what that feels like as an adult and the impact of that on me is I never want to feel poor. And like it's a mentality and it's a concept more than anything. So I'm saying it in a way, I'm trying to sterilizing it or reducing it to that statement. But really, what it means for me is I don't want to have to feel like I'm denying myself some basic needs and wants because I can't afford it or I don't have the money or the resources to get it. Maybe I can't get it today, but maybe in 2 weeks I can get it. And it was this constant struggle of not denying myself, but not being overindulgent because there was no indulgence when I was a kid. And now having to balance, like not being overindulgent as an adult, making up for my childhood is an everyday struggle, quite honestly.
For so many of us, for so many of us. But I brought up the concept earlier of like generational wealth, and it sounds like kind of what I'm hearing is there's been this like time frame where you learned a money message growing up and you decided to kind of take the opposite approach. There are people that are like, this is all I know, this is what it is, and they kind of continue on. So it's hard to create the generational wealth when you do the exact same thing that your parent did, because like I said, the way that you've absorbed the information is I don't know any better. It sounds like instead you were like, nope, this doesn't seem like the right way, I'm going to try something different. And it's going really well as far as like creating the positive money messages for your children, being more transparent with your children, them understanding, like you said, needs versus wants. I think we take for granted the little seeds that get planted when you are consistent, and it's easy to break down. I think that that's also a thing. There's the pressure of I want my kids to feel like they have XYZ sort of thing, and it's like, okay, well, every time we go to the store, I give her only one toy, but it's just $5. Well, if it was just $5 and it was every week, and we could have put that $5 away, sort of deal. And like you said, if you can teach her to be satiated by just simply walking around for them same 20 minutes that she was going to walk around and pick something, walk around and not pick something, just see what's out there and realize that her life is none the worse for wear and tear for not picking up a tchotchke along the way that's going to end up on the floor, a week later after they lost interest in it.
Or in the trash.
Right. Exactly.
One of the other things that I noticed about my mom, even and she mentioned it recently, is she doesn't have any credit cards. And I think there's a mindset around debt that is also very different, and how to have a healthy, a reasonable amount of debt versus saying, I don't want a credit card and I can't have a credit card. And it came up recently because she wanted to order something on Amazon. And I told her, she was worried about ordering online and people having access to her bank account. And I said, well, if you use a credit card, you're more protected against fraud. And also, it doesn't impact the money in your bank. And she said, well, I don't have a credit card, which I found very surprising, mostly because I just thought everyone had at least one credit card for emergencies. But it tracks with her relationship with money in that I think she doesn't feel like she has the restraint not to max out a credit card on frivolous things. And maybe because she was in debt before. I mean, I'm pretty sure she filed bankruptcy before. And so maybe that's impacting her reason for not having a credit card. But even as a 72, 73-year old, having at least one credit card in the event of an emergency or when you want to order online. Like I try not to use my debit card for certain purchases simply because you want the additional protection. I don't want to check into a hotel with my debit card. I don't want them holding $500 of my money while I'm staying there simply because they can and they say, well, we need to place this hold. I'd rather do it with a credit card. But she doesn't have that. I don't know if it's restraint or what it is, but it just made me think, wow, she must really think she can't manage a credit card without going over the limit or maxing it out.
Yeah, it's a really interesting observation, and I would say it's like one of the things once again is generational. People come from a time frame where debt was such a bad thing. They want nothing to do with it. They don't understand how it works, and so it's like I'd rather be safe than sorry. But occasionally they're sorry because they can't purchase something in the kind of world that we live in right now.
Right. And we talked about just on the we she has talked a lot also more recently about generational wealth when we were talking about estate planning and her house. And she's put a lot of thought into the idea that she doesn't want her house sold when she passes away. She wants it passed on through generations. And it's something that I've thought a lot about because although I am the youngest, I'm treated like the oldest in that a lot of responsibility falls on me. So when we're talking about generational wealth and this home, and I'm going to be the person responsible for it, it still carries a mortgage. It still carries like taxes, insurance has to be paid. And if no one is living in it, that means we would need to either get a tenant or someone would need to move in it and cover those expenses. And now the mortgage is low, and I suspect it can be just paid off pretty quickly. But ultimately, a house is a responsibility, and it probably has maybe $600,000, $700,000 in equity. And so I've thought about whether or not the generational wealth is in keeping the home or selling the home. The proceeds of selling the home can be used towards a lot of different things that can also establish generational wealth. I can use it to help pay for my kids to go to college. I can reinvest it in the home that I'm currently in. It could be reinvested into the stock market or an IRA. I mean, the home itself has more sentimental value for her than I think generational wealth, but it's also this very narrow thought process around what generational wealth means. And it doesn't always mean keeping the house for years and years and years. I mean, of course, the market will dictate what the value is over time. And because it's in DC, the value has increased steadily over the years. But in terms of the responsibility of it, and the maintenance of it. And if I already own a home, it's more responsibility and quite frankly a hassle if none of my sisters move in or another family member doesn't move in and just takes on that responsibility. Otherwise, it's just another thing I have to do.
Yeah, I feel like money is a tool to live the life you want, and that was kind of like the missing piece of the puzzle for her is that she doesn't realize that you might need the money to be able to use as this tool versus having this house and this responsibility, and you could pass it down for 3 or 4 more generations, and it could be worth $5 million down the road, but if your life was not positively impacted by actually holding on to this house, did you really leave? Like this house was not a legacy, and it didn't give you the opportunity to, like you said, really provide that legacy to you because you didn't get the opportunity to make a good decision with the funds that you could have used for XYZ other things.
And if it becomes just more of a debt, I have to refinance it because it needs a lot of work. And now I'm going into more debt to make the house marketable to a tenant, for example. And I'm not able to realize any meaningful gain from that. Now it's no longer really an asset for me. It's a debt. And, just thinking about that, and I've thought about it a long time, ever since she sort of talked about this is her wishes, like, and she's put it in her will, the house should never be sold, or, her desire for the house to never be sold. I mean, anything could happen. What if one of my sisters has like medical bills or medical expenses or, again, college, things that would take us out of debt? And we have this asset here. Is it reasonable to go into more debt rather than liquidating an asset so that you're preventing the debt or from just sinking further into debt? you know like it's just unreasonable amount of debt. I'm not talking about like selling it for a credit card or something like that, but things happen, unexpected things happen, and if I don't have the resources, but I have this house, is it really your desire that I sink further into unimaginable, unreasonable debt, or use the house as leverage to right side my finances?
Right. Yeah, and I just think about this, at least in light of the fact that you also have a regular job, you also have children, so this is yet another ball to juggle. It's just something being added to your plate, whereas people are just like, I need to handle what I need to handle. Which to that point, like there's a lot going on in the government right now in your federal job.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about that and what you think as it relates to the type of work that you do and all the crazy things that have happened since the year has started.
Sure. So I want to start by touching on the reason I decided to join the government is because I graduated law school with debt. I had my undergraduate debt, and around the time that I was about to finish law school, Obama created the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. So I knew I wanted to do something in public service for 10 years so that I can get my student loan debt wiped away. And then, of course, you get into the repayment plan. Over time, the repayment plan was just never enough to actually pay down the debt, and the interest kept growing. And so by the time my loans were forgiven, woo-hoo, thanks to Lauryn, my loans were forgiven. The dollar amount on the loan had nearly doubled. So my loans were forgiven, I want to say last year or 2 years ago. And it was 238,000 in student loans. So that is the reason I joined the federal government, because I found the public service loan forgiveness program to be very attractive. And also, as I said before, government in DC is the most competitive employer in terms of retirement benefits and flexibility. So at first I joined the local government, DC government, right out of law school in 2012. And the local government is also competitive, but it doesn't pay as much. But in terms of comparable benefits and flexibility, it's pretty close. And it really gave me the opportunity to, one, get back to my community by way of government service to local government, but also created opportunities for me to learn and grow. So I was in the DC government for about 10 years before I left and joined the federal government in November of last year. Prior to joining, of course, I had accepted the position long before this current administration. So I had been interviewing all summer. I had accepted the job in September. And at that time, no one knew what the outcome of the election would be. And so, of course, when I joined, once the election results came out, I reached back out to my agency just to ask, should I be concerned? Are there any concerns about or anything I should be aware of that happened under him during the last administration? And there were just no, things were quiet. It was pretty mild. And we don't think there's any cause for concern. Well,
Then what had happened was,
as we see, there was lots of cause for concern. So the same day of the inauguration, he puts out an executive order that ends all remote work and telework for the federal government. So again, I joined for the flexibility. The flexibility is now gone. And then there is lots of direction, instruction, guidance. They later rephrased it as guidance, but the instruction was clear that the interest was to reduce the federal government in size, and that included staff. And by reducing federal government staff, they started with probationary hires. And because I had just joined in November, clearly I was a probationary hire. So I joined for flexibility, gone, stability, gone. And it's become more and more apparent that I have really no recourse if I'm let go during my probationary period. And I certainly, they don't have to give me a real justification for why. It could just be that they're downsizing or they don't need the position anymore. And I'm probationary for 2 years. So that means I have no job security. Now, before this administration, I really wasn't concerned about that. It's understood that you have to come in, you're new, before you're really fully granted, this permanent status, you have to prove yourself. And I was prepared to do that under reasonable circumstances. But right now it's just unreasonable and untenable times to be a federal government employee simply because at any point, this administration can decide that your agency doesn't need to exist, or it doesn't need to exist at the size that you're at or the scale. And so we have about 350 employees at any time. They could say, you need to cut that down by 100, or you need to reduce your footprint by 200 people. And the probationary people would be the first to go because we have limited to no rights in terms of an appeal. So it's been very daunting thinking about the fact that I've only been here 6 months. As far as I know, I've been doing a good job, but at any point, things could change. And I could find out simply by coming into the building and my badge doesn't work.
oh my goodness, that would be a tough way to learn. Like, oh, I didn't have to get out of bed this morning, and also there's not another check coming in a few weeks. Like,
Yep.
and so to the point you brought up, like legality, I think that is a key piece of this puzzle because my understanding is that a lot of this stuff that is happening right now is via executive order. And so what also makes this very complicated is that basically we could wait 4 years and all of these executive orders get wiped out because they're not being put into place in a more stable or like via Congress, if you will. But maybe you obviously know a lot more about the law than I do. Just like how many people have been let go, and then like as it relates to legality, it's been kind of clear in some parts that some things that have been done are not necessarily legal. The pathway to undoing them is still, it's a long road to untangle.
Yeah. The legality of it is certainly questionable. So I'll give you just a brief, very brief understanding of federal government employment. If you, as a federal government employee, you serve either a 1 year or 2 year probationary period. I'm 2 years because I'm an attorney, but other positions are 2 years for different reasons. But by and large, probationary means you serve 1 year and then you are no longer probationary. While you're probationary, you can be let go for performance or conduct, and essentially you have no appeal rights or very limited appeal rights, limited to you believe that you were discriminated against. After you have served your probationary period, in order to be terminated, your agency must show persistent conduct and performance issues, and it needs to be progressive. So it doesn't mean that one instance you can now be terminated. It needs to be very progressive, and it needs to show that you were communicating with the employee in a meaningful way, that their conduct or performance was subpar. And so you would hear a lot that it is difficult to terminate a federal government employee who's not in their probationary period because they have all of these protections under the law. If you illegally terminate someone for performance or conduct, they have appeal rights. They not only would get their job back, but they would get back pay and likely attorney's fees. The other way that federal government employees can be let go is what's called a reduction in force or a RIF. And reduction in force simply means that we no longer need these positions, and so we are abolishing them. And by abolishing them, we are no longer going to even recruit for those positions. Under a reduction in force, however, when you're letting go those employees, you have to pay them out severance. And what severance is calculated is somewhat a complex calculation, but it is based on how long you've been in the federal government, what your salary is. And then there's other factors like based on like how close you are to retirement. I mean, it is a complex process and it costs a lot of money. And so that's why you would start with probationers because they have limited rights. You can be let go. And it doesn't need to be progressive. It doesn't need to be sort of in increments. It could just be, we don't think you're a good fit and you can be let go. And unless I can prove I'm being discriminated against, my appeal rights are very limited. I'm also not entitled to any severance and I can be let go with no notice. So 1 day, 2 day, which is again, very different for someone who's not in their probationary period. If I'm going to propose a termination, I have to give adequate notice. And then I have to give the opportunity to respond. So it's not just the supervisor says, I was AWOL for 2 days and I'm now terminated. The supervisor has to propose the termination. I have an opportunity to respond to the termination. And then the agency has a decision to make about whether or not they're going to support the supervisor's proposal or dismiss it. So the process is more complex than the news and people in the media are making it seem to be. When you are doing these reduction in force, especially these large, well, let me back up. Thousands of probationary employees across the federal government were let go. And that's playing out in court right now because there were, from off the top of my head, 2 federal court judges that said those probationary terminations were illegal. So remember when I said it still needs to be based on performance or conduct, you have to tell people whether it was based on performance or conduct. And if you say it's performance, but the person has been receiving stellar reviews, during your probationary period, your supervisor is typically more engaging with you about, how things are going, if you're like sort of on target with your work, things like that. And so if it's based on performance, you need to substantiate that it's based on performance. So people were appealing saying, I was terminated. My letter said it was for performance, but look at all of this positive feedback that I've been getting based on my performance. So judges are saying you are trying to circumvent the RIF process. If you're doing a reduction in force, you need to follow the law under the reduction in force. If you're terminating people for probationary reasons, it needs to be for performance or conduct. Those federal court decisions are now with the Supreme Court. And as of yesterday, the Supreme Court said they are holding on returning those probationary employees back to work. So those 2 federal court judges essentially said, you need to bring all of these people back to work. Those probationary terminations were illegal. Now, on the reduction in force, we haven't seen an appeal in court on those. But what I will say is this, you may have heard a lot of talk about the fork in the road, this email that is sort of very Elon Musk driven. The reason why the fork on the road is so critical and quite frankly beneficial to the administration is because it required employees to voluntarily resign. And by voluntarily resigning, you waive your right to any appeal.
Appeal and severance.
And the severance, exactly. And how they made it attractive is to say, if you resign in February, we're going to keep you on the books until September, until the end of the fiscal year. And you'll get, continuing your contributions to retirement, continuing contributions to your benefits, and then you just don't need to work.
And healthcare?
And healthcare. Yep. And people were very skeptical of it because there's no law in place that allows for that. So federal government employment is highly regulated. You can't just, it's certain things you just can't do. And one of those things is you can't put people on administrative leave, because that's essentially what this would have been, for like 6 or 7 months. It's just not legal. And so a lot of people didn't take it. And so the idea was, if people would just voluntarily resign, we don't have to do the legwork of terminating people or reduction in force with severance. But the problem with that was a lot of people didn't take it. Across government, federal government has over 2 million employees. And I want to say they were hoping for at least 10%. And I think it was maybe 1% that took it. The day after that expired is where you see these very large scale termination of probationary employees across the entire federal government. Hundreds of thousands of people were let go. And now the next instruction for agencies is to consider reduction in force, which is you need to downsize your workforce. You need to identify a plan for downsizing your workforce and submit that to the administration. So the stability of federal government employment is completely non-existent. And I think, I know people in private sector and they say, well, this has always been the case for private sector. The federal government is different. I mean, it's just the bottom line. As I said, is highly regulated in a way, because federal government employment is how people get Medicaid benefits. It's how people get Social Security benefits. It's how people get veterans benefits. It's how we further the mission of the administration. And so if you have at will employment, you're at risk of not being able to fulfill not only the mission of the agency, but the administration. And then its large scale impact to the public and the beneficiaries of federal government. Those protections are in place for a reason, not just for the benefit of the employees, but for the benefit of the American people. And I think that's the disconnect that a lot of people are seeing. If you let go thousands of employees at the IRS, which did happen, tens of thousands of people at the IRS were let go. When you need to call to ask a question about a form, when you need to call to ask a question about your refund status, where wait times are already long and you need to reach someone, or your refund processing your tax return has taken longer than normal, or your tax return isn't processed at all, or you're seeing more errors in the processing of your return. There's a reason those people were there. And I'm not saying I'm not against efficiency. I'm just against efficiency that doesn't make sense. But right now, it's just so untenable to the point where I think it's just going to have a larger impact on people.
Like there's a huge number of people that have, no income, or yeah, like you said, maybe they have severance, but there are people just been let go of probationary. To your point, you just need to go look for another job. So now we have high unemployment. They have the people that are being taken care of by those people that are now unemployed, that are suffering tough times. But like you said, there's a ripple effect for everybody. From a student loan perspective, everybody's been stuck in a holding pattern for 10 months now. It's something ridiculous because of the changes. And like I said, it's not going to get better. It's only going to get worse. They're trying to figure out how to start making their payments, but there's no Department of Education to call to be like, hey, you didn't do this or you didn't do that. But yeah, I think one of the big pieces of the puzzle is some people don't realize like how this affects me. Like if you're like, oh, I'm not a federal employer, this doesn't matter, you are grossly mistaken, because your passport is something that is federal. Like I said, your student loans, your social security, all these different pieces of the puzzle. And like you said, smaller workforce means longer wait times, bigger inefficiencies while they try to figure these things out, in addition to all the people that are actually being affected and all the households that are being affected by the fact that those people don't have jobs.
And I mean, quite honestly, just the weight of in this region, especially on the local economies. I mean, shuttering businesses because there are no federal government workers that are patronizing them, or even worse, people are going to be foreclosing on their homes. I mean, imagine if you let go like thousands of people in one area, and now thousands of people are looking for jobs, and there's no market or job opportunities for them. What impact do you think that's going to have on their ability to pay their rent, their ability to pay their mortgage? And so when you're seeing foreclosures and your neighbors, I mean, I know for neighborhoods that are nothing but federal government employees, and so those, your value of your home is going to go down, the quality of life will impact all of us, because it's going to be such a negative impact on the local economy, especially in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. I mean, they are the number one employer in this region.
I guess as a final wrap up, where do we go from here? How do we bounce back? How do we stay the course? What do you think about this? I know it's hard to speculate, but what are some possible solutions or outcomes?
One of the things that I've been doing is just being resume ready. I make sure that my resume is up to date so that if I'm seeing an opportunity, that I'm applying, simply because I don't know. I don't want to stay and wait to be let go. There's no certainty in my position. There's no certainty anywhere, but what I know for sure is that there could be a decision made at any point that my position is no longer needed. And so I'm being proactive about making sure that my resume speaks to my current experience, my past experience, and then applying for positions that I think I could be well suited for. And so I think maintaining your resume. All of the other things that, should just be intuitive, but I know are not intuitive for some people. So I'm just going to say it: spending very conservatively. This is not the time to make big purchases. Think about whether, needs versus wants, and then putting extra money to the side. And then the last thing, and this is something that I did recently, is, reach out to if you have 401k or some supplemental retirement. I mean, if you really needed to withdraw from it, what would be the penalties? Could you do it? Like if you were in as a last resort, I've lost my job, I've burned through my emergency fund, I don't have any income, and I haven't gotten a job yet, and my mortgage is due. What are my options for either seeking a hardship from my mortgage company? I've reached out just to find out what that process would be. And then also, what penalty, if at all, would I suffer if I needed to pull from my retirement if there is a hardship? So just being proactive about where can I tap into resources if I exhausted my emergency fund, and knowing exactly how long I can survive without a check on my emergency fund.
You killed it. I think that is like A++ advice for preparing for the uncertainty, because none of us know, like you said, what's around the corner, what's going to happen. And I mean, and that's everyday life, like separate of what's happened this year and all the uncertainty that we know is coming down the pipeline. This is good advice for life, to make sure you know these things, because if poop hits the fan in a way that is just completely unexpected for you, you could have done everything right. You could have, a 6-month emergency fund. And as I said, the economy go, like we've all just lived through COVID fairly recently, where the world shut down.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't be so surprised by the unexpected. Even though we're all hoping that this doesn't become the status quo, we're not doing something similar to this every 3 or 4 years. It's great advice to just be as prepared as possible, to be as conservative as possible, to be, as much of a good steward as you can of your dollars, in light of the fact that, like you said, you may have to make them stretch. We talk about, just as a good money habit in general, living below your means. And I think now more than ever, if you haven't made those changes to your lifestyle, this is a great time to be doing that, so that you can be a little bit more stealth when something comes your way that you're not expecting.
Yep.
Jessica, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really, really appreciate you. I think that's going to be super helpful. I'll also say, and I'll drop this in the show notes, that there was the CFP board, Certified Financial Planning Board, did a webinar for federal employees fairly recently to help people be able to sort through, the uncertainty as it relates to the finances. So if you're looking for more information on how you can prepare yourself, I'll put a link to that webinar as well.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Is there any way that we can support you? Any projects that you're working on? Do you want people to follow you on social media? Shout yourself out right now. Right.
Nothing right now. My page is private. I'm a private citizen. I don't have anything going on that people can support. Support Lauryn, support her work. She's doing great work educating people about finances, about being better stewards of their money. So support her, listen to her podcast, listen to all the old episodes, the current episodes, take a look at her Instagram page, comment, like, share, all the things.
Love it. All right. Until next time, good people.